There is no statue of the Daughters of Zelophehad, but there should be. They did something that nobody had ever done before. They convinced God to change God's mind, to amend an unjust law. Even Moses couldn't do that. So where is their statue? Where is their song? Where is their Chagall painting? In this week's Parsha, we read the tale of Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, whose father Zelophehad had died without any male heirs. God's law stated that these sisters would not inherit any of their father's land and that their family name would end with him. The sisters could not abide this injustice. The Torah leaves no doubt as to the power of this act. The verbs it uses are verbs of confidence, unity, and clarity of purpose. Tikrevna, the story begins as they drew close. They walked right up to Moses and Eleazar and the other male chieftains. Ta'amodna, they stood up to power. They stood up for themselves, for each other. Ya'amod, they spoke truth to that power. Our father was not amongst the rebels. He died for his own sin. Let our father's name not be lost just because he had no sons. Give us a holding amongst our kinsmen. Moses did not know how to proceed. How could he change what God had written? So he does what any responsible administrator does. He goes and gets the manager. He takes their case to God, and God does not hesitate. The plea of Zelophehad's daughter is just, God says. Give them their father's portion. In fact, God does not just make an exception. God changes the law. Starting from then on, if a father had no sons, the inheritance would go to his daughters, and if he had no daughters, then to his next closest relative. For all time, the law was amended because the daughters of Zelophehad stood up. They drew near. They spoke. Has there ever been a more radical act? To point out to God an injustice in God's own law, to hold God accountable to God's promise to be fair and just. What made them think that they would not be killed when they drew near to the center of power? What gave them this certainty and courage? A midrash imagines that the daughters had heard that in the promised land into which they were about to enter, it was going to be apportioned among all the males of the tribes. They said to each other, "The compassion of God is not like human compassion. Human rulers are more concerned with males than females, but the one who spoke and brought the world into being is not like that. Rather, God shows mercy to every living thing." It's pretty progressive for a text written in the 3rd century of the Common Era. The Midrash imagines that the daughters were intuiting that the iniquities they saw around them were not written into the fabric of creation, but that God favored equality and would hear their call for justice. Perhaps God was even waiting for them to speak up. Perhaps God relished the opportunity to be challenged by God's greatest creation to live up to God's highest ideal. Perhaps God smiled as God took out the red pen to edit the law and make it more fair. This most powerful, most radical, most beloved act, and yet the story of the Daughters of Zelophehad too often remains hidden, a footnote in the text where it should have its own chapter all to itself. There is no statue to Ernestine Rose either, though she is the spiritual great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Zelophehad's daughters. She was born in Poland in 1810, the daughter of a rabbi. She was sent to Cheder, a religious school, for her elementary years, but when she started asking questions that her teachers saw as too radical or unbecoming of a girl, her father decided he should educate her at home. He taught her Torah as he would have taught a son, though he too discouraged her critical questioning. Ernestine's mother died when she was 15 and left her an inheritance. Her father arranged a marriage for her to a man she did not wish to marry, and that arrangement was that he would get her inheritance whether she went through with it or not. So she snuck off to the community court, and she sued her father to get out of the engagement and to keep her inheritance. And she won. Things at home were tense after that, especially when her father married a young woman about her age, so Ernestine decided it was time to leave. She went to Berlin, where she was exposed to secular modern writing and Enlightenment principles of equality. She made her way to England, where she fell in with a group of social reformers led by Robert Owen. They believed in a radical equality between the sexes, and it was here that she first began to speak publicly on issues of women's suffrage and workers' rights. She sailed for America in 1836, where she quickly became an activist. She went around New York knocking on doors, organizing people to fight for women's property rights, a cause that would have made her forebears, Zelophehad's daughters, proud. After 12 years of activism in 1848, New York State passed the first married women's property law in the United States, and other states followed. Ernestine had become a leader of the American suffrage movement, as well as a vocal abolitionist. Echoing the Midrash, she wrote, "Emancipation from every kind of bondage is my principle. I go for recognition of human rights without distinction of sect, party, sex, or color." Susan B. Anthony had a photograph of Ernestine on her study wall. She was a celebrated public speaker who became known as the Queen of the Platform for her rousing and inspiring speeches. Her life was not without challenges. She had a good friend named Horace Seaver, who was the editor of the free thought newspaper, the Boston Investigator, which frequently published her speeches and writing. Free thinkers routinely denounced the ancient Hebrews, whom they believed created religious bigotry. But when the Civil War broke out, Seaver wrote condemning contemporary American Jews and calling for them to be expelled from the United States. "I thought I smelled brimstone, genuine Christian brimstone," when reading that piece, Rose wrote to Seaver, and she stopped submitting to the paper. Ernestine had given birth twice and lost both children as babies, so she had no heirs. She died in 1892, and her funeral was attended by friends, and many came to honor her at her memorial. Tributes flowed in from all over the world. One American feminist of the next generation wrote, "The liberal laws which we now live under are due to the tireless exertions of this gifted woman, and never ought the women of New York to forget the debt of gratitude they owe to Ernestine L. Rose." But they did forget. Though she had been the best female orator of her age, she was rarely mentioned in the history books. An article in the Jewish Forward in 1927 declared that few had ever heard of her. It was not until the 1970s that women's and black history movements started to reclaim her story. What gave her the courage to stand up to her father, to the government of the United States, to the patriarchy, to anti-Semitism? Perhaps she had a sense that the same divine promise that Zelophehad's daughters understood, the promise of equality under God, was her inheritance too. Perhaps she saw in America the unfulfilled potential of that promise, the words written but not yet realized that all people are created equal. And there was no statue in New York Harbor when Ernestine Rose arrived in America. That statue would come later, in 1886. Another woman standing up with broken chains at her feet, Lady Liberty, a symbol to all who arrived on our shores that hope and that promise and that possibility. At her base is a poem written by another female activist, Emma Lazarus. It is entitled New Colossus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Lady Liberty stands with her light held high, a beacon and reminder not of who we are, but who we could be, who we hope to be. She is a lighthouse guiding us in and keeping us away from the rocky shoal. At the unveiling ceremony of the statue, the final speaker was Chauncey M. Depew, president of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad and future senator. He spoke of the abolition of privileges to the few and the enfranchisement of the individual, the equality of all men before the law and universal suffrage, the ballot secure from fraud and the voter from intimidation, the press free and education furnished by the state for all, liberty of worship and free speech, the right to rise and equal opportunity for honor and fortune. We are still working to achieve those dreams. And Lady Liberty is still standing tall to remind us her ideals. These are just some of the mothers of exile, the voices of the downtrodden, of the dreams deferred but not diminished. Lady Liberty with her torch, Emma Lazarus with her pen, Ernestine Rose with her platform, the Daughters of Zelophehad with nothing but a just cause and the courage to speak. And above them, inspiring them, is God, the original mother of exiles, the parent of all people, the voice so committed to justice that she will laugh with delight when her children call her attention to her own failures of justice. Ernestine Rose wrote, agitate, agitate ought to be the motto of every reformer. Agitation is the opposite of stagnation. The one is life, the other is death. This is the motto of the mothers of exiles. Not complacency, but productive agitation towards the world we were promised, towards the country we were promised. The Daughters of Zelophehad agitated because they knew God to be fair, even though the world around them was not yet fair. Ernestine Rose agitated because she believed in equality, even though the world around her was not yet equal. Lady Liberty opens her door to the tempest-tossed, even if they are not always welcomed like they should be. All of them, all these mothers of exiles, remind us both of the promise and our power to fulfill it. May we be prophets of a brighter future like Malcha, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirza, like Ernestine and Emma, like Lady Liberty herself. May we be agitators like these mothers of exiles as we work to give birth to the world we were promised.